Thank you. Hello, everybody. I think she missed in the introduction that my family business and my first startup were both in manufacturing and defense in the industrial area. So I spent about almost 10 years working in those industries before my startup. There was a lot of women in those industries. It was just full of them. So I went through this period which I now refer to as sort of the science of muddling through. And I was just sort of getting by. And I was using platforms that were new. Facebook came out in my third year university. And I was using these platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, QuickBooks for some basic accounting. And I was used to using these in my day-to-day life, but in the manufacturing and industrial spaces, I was constantly feeling this dull of frustration that they were operating at a different level. And it was hard to gain access to the industry, it was hard to get data, and everything was driven by paper. And it was an old boys network, and it was just a constant frustration. So I sold the first company I started along with the family business to a private equity fund, 2011, and continued to work for the new private equity fund, all the while feeling this frustration and starting to apply some of the general technologies that I was using that people thought was quite unique or different. And I decided that I had to innovate when I heard the magical words, "Nicole, you are fired." So I got fired, and I decided to start this technology company. And I don't have a technical background at all, but I knew that I was thinking a little bit differently about the industry. And I blame that on my age, possibly my gender, because I was looking at things a little differently. And so I knit together the technologies that were so prevalent in everyday life, you know, a platform for a network for marketing, like a marketplace, with general data analytics, and I applied them to this sector. And so I did what everybody does when they want to raise funding to get started. I built a PowerPoint that had the Canadian hockey stick on it. So I asked everyone I knew. I went down to Bay Street. I had a nickname for these guys. You guys might be too young for this, but the Backstreet Boys, I called them the BSBs. And I asked all of them for funding for this startup. And I got no, 8 months, no. And I had an early angel investor come in, a great guy, huge supporter of women, and he was a visionary. He was the first person to buy the rights to ads for Facebook. So if you remember the Facebook movie, he was the guy Eduardo was going to meet in New York. And I met him by chance, and he supported me very early on when all I had was that lame PowerPoint. And he said, "Nicole, I think you've finally done it. You've found your guy, you've convinced him, he's going to call you tonight, and he's going to offer you funding to get this startup going." And so I got all excited, looked around and realized I didn't have a lot of friends left because I'd been working on this thing in total isolation. And I went to the wine rack, which is the Ontario place to buy the local wine, and I went and bought a bottle of sparkling wine. And I'll never forget this moment. I'm standing in line and I get a phone call, and it comes up as a joke because I was so jaded at this point. It said BSB, Bay Street Boy, and he calls and he says, "Nicole, I had great news for you. We had approved this funding for your company. But unfortunately, we got a phone call tonight from somebody who is a deep domain expert. He has years of experience in this industry. He's very well respected, and he's in the club. And he told us, and it went on the record, this industry will never change. And so it would be irresponsible of me to use my investors' money to invest in your company." And so there's something about anger that has the ability to drive people. And I put that guy's picture on my bathroom mirror to remind myself to prove him wrong. And what I want to talk to you guys about today is how there's a lot that's wrong with women and equality, but I believe that this new wave of the new economy, driven by innovation, will prove to be a huge opportunity for the next generation and for women. So I want to back up first. I'm a millennial, and I was not a child prodigy. I came home from school every day, and I had a business professor. It was that guy. Mr. Burns, who led a nuclear plant, taught me that leading a business is all about hierarchy. It's all about sitting in the corner office. It's all about hoarding information. And it's all about fear. Disobey me and I release the dogs, right? This was my framework for what business was like. But I believe that that's all changing. Netflix, I read a lot about the CEO of Netflix, and he went through the entrepreneur lull, which we've all been through, and I felt so bad for him when I read this story. He was selling DVDs out of these red vending machines in all of the Blockbusters. Does anyone here even remember Blockbuster? It's only been bankrupt for 6 years. It's not that long. It was the largest video rental company. They had assets all over the world. They had data on millions and millions of customers. They knew what you watched. They knew what you liked. They knew everything about you. They had huge resources, lots of cash, massive valuation. And the CEO of Netflix came to the CEO of Blockbuster, and he said, "We're suffering real bad, and we're partnered with you, and we need help, and I'll sell you my whole company for $50 million. And the CEO of Blockbuster said, "This will never change." Netflix is now worth $33 billion, and the CEO of Blockbuster has had a hard time finding a new job. And there are lots of other examples, and we just keep hearing the same example over. It's getting boring. It's the same thing over and over again. It's not a question of if, it's always a question of when the economy will transition. I was at an economist event, and I sat on stage with a bunch of fintech companies, financial technology companies, and the moderator turned to one of the top people at BMO, and he said, "Are you the yellow cab, and are they Uber?" And he said, "Of course not." And he might be right, because he's protected by a lot of regulation, but they need to partner with the up-and-coming innovative companies. And so I believe this death makes way for a lot of opportunity, and technology is becoming so much easier to launch. You can have a website up for free in seconds now. When Mark Zuckerberg was raising money for Facebook, he was asking everybody for little bits of money, family and friends. And what was all that money for? He was stacking servers in his house. I just use Amazon cloud services for pennies. So it's becoming easier, cheaper, and way faster to launch technology. And technology is allowing us to access markets easier, cheaper, and faster. And we're demanding as consumers to get access to those technologies for easier, cheaper, and faster. And when we have an experience like we do on Amazon today, we demand that experience from other companies. And so our experience in that one application will require the same experience in other sectors, because we'll just start to demand it. And technology is connecting us more, and it's bringing about a lot more transparency. I read of a story of a young girl in northern India who never would have had access to some of the expensive Ivy League schools in the United States, but she did an MIT course online, and her results came in, and they realized that she was top of the class. And they gave her access and brought her to MIT, one of the best mathematics schools in the world, immediately. So it's connecting us, it's liberating us. There were so many stories of these waves in developing countries of people connecting and getting together to liberate themselves from political oppression. And it's lowering barriers and access. And that's going to make a lot of big corporations and established people and the old boys network very nervous. So I basically think technology can solve everything. But I'm very bullish on what impacts will flow from these things on a socioeconomic level. And so I believe that it is going to have a very positive impact for women and young girls. So here's some of the stats, and the Premier got into my favorite one, but there's 0% of the top 5% of Fortune 500 companies. The only exception that lasted for a couple years was Mary Barra, and she was made CEO of GM, which I'm going to get to. Here's my story from the beginning. Less than 2% of venture capital-backed companies in the world are run by women. Women make up 57% of middle management, but 14% of senior management, so it's clear where they're stuck. More more CEOs with the name John than women, so the Premier got to that one. That one just boggled my mind, because I only know a few Johns. And this one kills me. I refer to it as pink sourcing. You know, if you want to outsource and have some cheaper labor costs, hire a woman, because women earn 76 cents for every dollar that a man earns in the identical job with the identical qualifications. So clearly the gap is not qualifications. So it's a bad news story. But there are changes that are coming about that are happening because of technology, and that are being driven because of technology. And what we're seeing now, some of the latest trends, is we're seeing the second generation of online platforms. So we're seeing the Ubers for, we're seeing the eBay for. So we're seeing niche applications of what were the general platforms. And back to what I said earlier, that consumers are demanding the same experience in everything they're doing now. The first company I invested in on Dragon's Den was Uber for prescriptions. And the founder had a strong domain expertise. So we're seeing this rolling out throughout. We're seeing people earning income differently. The next generation, most people in this room, are very likely going to be earning multiple streams of income at the exact same time, because there are so many platforms where they can make jewelry while they're maybe driving an Uber or renting out their spare room on Airbnb. So we're changing these platforms from driving to change in the way we expect to work as well, and the way people will be employed in the future. And that is making changes. And these platforms are demanding new job titles and new roles. We just hired a community manager. There wasn't a community manager for the shop floor in the factory that I ran. So we're starting to see all of these changes happening. And one book I recommend everyone get is written by Kirsten Stewart. She's the CEO of Twitter Canada, and she's written a book called Our Turn. And these are some of the themes from her book about how technology will have a positive impact for women. The first one is a power shift. This goes back to my Mr. Burns slide. It will no longer be just about the hierarchies. Leaders will need to manage out, not down. It won't be about pushing demands downward. It'll be about collaboration. It'll be about networks. It'll be about being open to working with others. And that happens to be something women tend to be very good at. So this will be a requirement to be a leader in the future, is to act this way. And along with that, this whole David and Goliath, I always felt like David my entire life. I was under-resourced and I was scrappy, but I never had the breadth that the Blockbuster had. And the internet is, because of all those things it is doing, reducing barriers and making it easier, and the way we can communicate, we are recasting this role, and the Davids of society are being put onto pedestals, and they're being called change makers, and they're getting access to everyday consumers online for free. So it's recasting that role, and women traditionally have almost played this David role in corporations. So we're starting to celebrate this a lot more, just like this event today, which will be an opportunity. Number 3 comes back to Mary Barra, the CEO of GM. I don't know if that's why they made her CEO, but she sure said that in her book, that she felt that she was the one that could go in and shake things up and change the culture. And she believes it's because she wasn't in the boys' club so much. She didn't suffer from the groupthink as badly. And so when corporations have this realization, we need to evolve, we need to adopt technologies, or we're going to be the yellow taxi, they very likely will look to women to do that, because women have had historically an ability to transform. Women are they're stronger transformers, and they can shake things up. There's a Hurricane Nicole hitting Bermuda right now, and I have a lot of friends making jokes about that, saying I've always been a hurricane. But that's the summary of what I've always felt that I am, and I think a lot of women and girls can be. This one is very interesting. By the time all of you, or the young girls in the room, get into the workforce, 60% of the new jobs created will require skills that only 20% of the skills exist today. So all of these new jobs will be for skills that are not even out there today, is what I'm saying. So the traditional roles behind an engineer, or these job titles that come with so much history, and something the Premier alluded to, that there's this subconscious thought that that role needs to be a man. These new jobs that are going to be coming out, like my example of a community manager, will be for something that only young people may understand, or people who have gone and taken up new skills because technology is requiring that. But they're also not going to come with that huge burden of many, many years of somebody tying a particular stereotype to that role. And so this will be the big driver. 67,000 new jobs were created in Canada last month. But the majority of those new jobs were part-time. The majority of them were driven by these new platforms. And the majority of them were entrepreneurial in nature. So these are contractors who have learned special skills they can apply to multiple companies. And they're learning these new skills, and companies need them. So that's where we're going to see a lot of the new jobs in the future. The resource economy that Canada has traditionally been is evolving and has to evolve. And lastly, this is my absolute favorite. This is the argument why companies and organizations are going to support women in the future, because there is studies, there are data that more diverse organizations are more profitable. Women make up huge parts of the consumer market. If your corporations don't understand what the majority of consumers are buying or how they behave, I don't know how they're going to sell to them. We need diverse opinions around the table. That same study said that governments who have a stronger mix, and when I say diverse, I say, of course, women, but also Aboriginals, people of different ages. People of different ages, you have to have different ages on boards. We're starting to see that more, where large corporations say, I need some young people on here to tell me what the internet's all about. So diversity is more profitable, and that will be the reason why corporations, for one thing, will start to evolve and demand more inclusion. And lastly, I am on the board of the Peter Munk School of Global Affairs. I absolutely love that role, and they do the Munk Debates. I don't know if anyone's seen the Munk Debates. There was a Munk Debate a couple weeks ago about Trump. But there was a Munk Debate a while ago with Malcolm Gladwell against Steve Pincher, and the title was, Will the Future Be Better? Malcolm Gladwell, who I've always been a huge fan of, argued that there is no data that proves that the future will be better, that you cannot correlate the past to the future. It's impossible. There's no direct correlation. You can't say because something has been a certain way, it will be in the future. And that goes to my Blockbuster example. Humans have a very hard time of conceptualizing exponential change. We think linearly. We don't think that as soon as a technology platform hits a point of scale, it will start to exponentially take over. We have a very hard time conceptualizing that. And so Malcolm Gladwell says, we can't apply the past to predict the future. That's my proof. This is data-driven. The future will not necessarily be better. So Steve Pincher was losing. I don't know if you know how the Munk Debates work, but you vote when you first walk in, and then the percentage of people that swing to the other side is the person who wins. So Steve Pincher was losing by a long shot, because everyone came in optimistic. They heard Malcolm Gladwell, and they said, this guy's right. And so Steve Pincher was doing his closing arguments, and at the very end, he said, there is no data that proves that because something happened in the past, it will mean the future will be better. But there is very strong data that proves, psychologists and psychiatrists have proved it over and over and over again, that if you think it will be better, you dramatically improve your chances of making it better. And so his last line was that optimism is truly a self-fulfilling prophecy, and that's what I believe. So I think regardless, we have a lot of opportunities in front of us, but we're the ones that are going to drive that. And lastly, I was told to answer a few questions today about giving some advice to my younger self. The first one, especially for those who are wanting to be entrepreneurial, want to participate in some of these new jobs and roles that are coming out. I find that when I was younger, I was always in a rush, and I always thought I had to take off the whole piece. And I was afraid to get started until I was fully ready. But I'm still not ready today. And so my first piece of advice I tell everyone, especially people doing startups or trying to start something new, I say, just start anything. and start it very, very small, but you have to start it now because I'm sorry, but you will probably mess up. And then you're going to have to change and pivot and continue to change and evolve from there. But if you don't get yourself on the ice, I don't know how you're going to score. And secondly, this is for young girls in particular. These are the two things I always struggled with. The first is act as if. That's completely all about confidence. And my first investor taught me that. He said, you know, when I had my second slide showing our future growth to investors, I sort of had like, I think we're going to go, like, you know, do this and be very conservative. And he said, if you go in and say, if we start this thing, or if I do this, or maybe if it all works out, then it will never work out, and they won't believe you, and no one will come along with you. So you have to act as if. You have to dress for the job you want, and you have to act as if everything's going to be great. And so acting as if is very important as you get started in your career, because if you don't believe yourself, no one else will. And own it is something I struggled with. Believe it or not, I think I remember wearing shoulder pads when I got started in the defense industry because I was trying to look like a man, I think. I was trying to fit in. I was trying to downplay my differences. And what I've learned since then is I believe that any of the success I've had or we've had at OMX has been because of our differences. So I had to own that. I had to say, I'm a young woman. My team is mostly made up of millennials or people a lot younger than me. And that's our differentiator. And we can bring this to the table. And so I had to learn to own that and stop trying to pretend to be something else. And the last one is, I think this is a problem for all of Canada. When I went down to Silicon Valley and did a lot of stuff with the startup community there, I think this is a Canada problem, but women and young girls suffer from it a lot worse. And that is just owning failure and being proud of failures you've had. When one of the episodes on Next Gen Dragon's Den, there was one deal where all three of the dragons agreed on one investment. And it was this young guy, and he had a lot of chutzpah. And he came in, and he was great. He had this great idea. So all three of us said, we're all in. And later, we started to do due diligence on the companies that we said we'd invest in. And he didn't answer our emails. So finally, he answers our emails, and he says, I'm very sorry. I can't do due diligence. My co-founder and I have broken up. He's stolen the code, and it's a huge mess, and I'm mortified. And what we decided to do was the three of us responded, and we cataloged all of our biggest colossal failures that we've had. And it took me a while to remember them all because I think I've pushed them out of my memory. But there was way more than there were successes, way more. And so we cataloged them all and wrote the most gigantic email back to this guy. And he thanked us for that. And it's become a big theme for me to talk to people about how important you need to get comfortable with failure is. The best part about failure is once you've completely failed and you're on the bottom of the floor, then you know that it's not that bad. And it removes a lot of the fear. So those are my 3 pieces of advice. And lastly, I believe it's a marathon. I don't think it's a sprint. I hope it's not 200 years. But the mentality that I have taken is this science of muddling through, which is we need to be in this for the long haul. And I believe that this is a marathon. I think your career is. I don't think you need to be in a huge rush. But I believe that innovation will drive more economic equality, and I'm very excited about it. So thank you so much for having me here today. This is awesome. I'll be around, so come say hi, and appreciate it.